we are officially going to start our conversation. So thank you for joining us today. Storytelling, your competitive advantage. And we're going to bring in our guest, Neal Foard, in just a second. If you tell your child not to go into the basement, they might listen to you. If you tell your child about how before you lived in the house, there was a monster down there, they probably will listen further. And that's the power of storytelling. It's not exactly the genre of storytelling we're talking about, but just to give you a quick impact. Mike, why are we doing an FYI episode on storytelling?
Well, in higher education, departments are competing for resources. In admissions, we're frankly competing for students. If we're in advancement, we are competing for donations. So we find that storytelling is a way to differentiate your team, your school, et cetera. And there's a lot of great storytellers out there, but I'm not sure there's a better modern storyteller than our guest today, Neal Foard. Lexi's going to put his YouTube channel in our comments. I highly recommend you subscribing to his page. There are lots of people who tell stories. There's a commentator I like, Neal, sorry, I know you're a fan of him too. Is it Van?
Yeah, Van Neistat.
Who's great, but he has lots of images and like really like it is Neal in front of a black screen telling a story, and it's maybe the longest video is 5-6 minutes long. They're quick, they are really impactful, and there's always a deeper meaning behind them. So we're both very excited to host Neal, and after this episode, I'd highly recommend watching his series because it's fantastic.
Yeah, Neal, say hi to everyone today.
Hey, hello. I'm sort of surprised and pleased by the number of people here. This is wonderful.
Oh yeah,
awesome. So as we go here, we're going to get started with Neal. If you have questions at any point in time, hit up Lexi in the chat. You can just type your question in, and Lexi Croysdale, our wonderful producer, will be reading them later. If you'd like to go on camera and join the conversation, do that as well. Just let Lexi know. Please stay muted though until you are called upon. That would be great. You're gonna all of our episodes of FYI are available via the registration link. So that is the homework that we need to do to get it out of the way. Let's get started with the conversation.
Great. Hey, Greg, I actually have a question I think you should address right now.
Okay.
Natalie wants to know, are Greg and Mike in a fight? LOL, they're in different spaces today.
No, I have a boot on my foot, so I can't drive.
And I visited my family and somehow got COVID. So that is why I am working from home. I'm feeling fine, nothing to worry about, but I don't want to spread it to anybody. So.
Okay, Mike, let's get started with a question.
Yeah, let's do it. So Neal, you've been in marketing and advertising for a long time. You've worked all sorts of careers. How has your worldview changed from kind of coming of age in the 70s and 80s to kind of where you are now?
Well, I wouldn't say that my worldview has changed.
Okay.
Because people haven't changed. I'm lucky that a lot of the vibrating anger that I used to have as a young man has dissipated. I mean, I was as subject to road rage as anybody back in the day. But the older I've gotten, I suppose the amount of testosterone I have in my system is less. And as a result, I've become a kind of more generous person. I don't mean generous in the sense of, monetary donation or volunteering, but generous in the sense of granting people, look, they're probably having a bad day if they're being disagreeable. It's not because they're evil. It's not because they're a bad person. It's not because their politics are rotten or anything like that. We're all human and we're all in this journey together. And I just am able to apply that in a way now where I might have lashed out as a younger person. But I still admire the same people now that I admired then, Roosevelt and Eisenhower and John Steinbeck and Kurt Vonnegut. So I think people are never going to change. And therefore, I think a certain amount of grace and granting people license to just be human is probably something I've always felt.
I love that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you mentioned having, I think you said vibrating anger. Did that like erode, or was there a moment that sort of changed for you?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. You know how you ever heard these things where they'll say, at what point does a pile of sand become a pile? It starts out, you go, here's a grain of sand, that's not a pile, 2 grains of sand, that's not a pile. But at some point, it's a pile. So when you say at one point, was there a turning point where I no longer had vibrating anger? I would say that honest to God, just the longer you live, you can go one of two ways. You can get cynical, thinking, oh, people are garbage. And, there's a lot of enemies out there and you're surrounded by people who don't like you. Or you can just somehow acknowledge that we are all in this together. There's a grand adventure, and it didn't come with a rule book. You didn't ask to be born, but here you are. So I suppose that in strict answer to your question, I started to notice courtesies that people were doing me that they didn't have to do, and they didn't do them with the expectation of a reward. They were just being sweet. And when I stopped to put them together to ask, I started saying to myself, are people bad? Are they inherently evil, or are people inherently good? And we know that, we're all biological cocktails of both. To the extent that you expect someone to be nice and you believe that they are nice before they prove you one way or the other, they kind of meet your expectations. You guys have probably heard that term, the Pygmalion effect, and that is that when you establish an expectation for a child or a police officer or whomever, that they are good, that they're going to behave well, they kind of tend to live up to your expectations. And the longer I have lived, the more true that has seemed to be.
Very interesting. Thank you.
So we have a higher education audience for us today, people at colleges and universities across the country. And we want to give them something to take away from this episode about storytelling and the power of storytelling and what they do and how that can help them with what they do. So what advice would you give in terms of storytelling to someone who has to either convince students that their school is the school to go to, help students along their life cycle, or maybe from an advancement standpoint, give to their school or just be a part of their organization? Talk about how storytelling can impact our specific audience of people talking to students.
You know how when you typically when you watch a presentation, whether it's an orientation or whatever it is, and somebody will get up and they've got a bunch of bullet points on the screen, and then they'll start reading the bullets.
Yes.
And they think that they're doing a good job because they're making sure to communicate all the points they wanted to communicate. But unfortunately, they're not looking at it through the eyes of the audience. They're looking at it through the eyes of the presenter. So they think they're doing a good job because they've done their duty. They've dumped the data on the audience. Therefore, it is the audience's responsibility to walk away with it. Okay, I've told you what I need to tell you. I'm off the hook now. You're all informed. Well, when you're in higher education, you know perfectly well, there's a big difference between dumping data on students and having them walk away with a fire of curiosity to learn more. It's the chalk and cheese. It's the difference between night and day. And my sense is that the first trick to storytelling, the first trick is you have to really want to help somebody that day. And that means you care deeply about what they walk away with. And a story isn't worth telling if someone doesn't learn anything. If they can't look at that and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, I cared about the people in that story, or I see myself in that tale, or something similar happened to me. And most of the time when I'm telling my own tales, you'll notice that if anybody of your guests were to go to the YouTube channel and watch any of these videos, you'll see I'm never the star of these stories. I'm always the one who sat there and learned something, or learned about humility. And I think there's a grand Socratic tradition, which is, come on, I was at Plato. He says, look, the only thing I know for sure is that I don't know anything. And so I think empathy on behalf of the storyteller to walk in the room and go, you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to put bullet points up on the screen, because bullet points are for memos. Stories are for presentations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story about what I want you to walk away with. And why would I do it in story form? Because stories are easy to remember, and stories create an emotional response, and they create images in the mind. Bullet points do not create images in the mind. And therefore, if you know, I find it mystifying why people post pictures of their meals on social media. Like that, to me, that's just the equivalent of a caveman picking up a rock and grunting rock. Okay, thank you. On the other hand, if you're going to post a picture of your breakfast or your car or your trip to Bali, what you don't realize is you're actually telling a story. The story you're telling is about a very insecure person who's desperately looking for validation. That's the story you're really telling. So if an educator is attempting to say, for example, persuade someone to attend their institution, there's any number of ways that they could frame that. And I do have to say that the first step, the empathy of saying, well, what might they be interested in? It could then involve, there was a person who had a very similar background to you. And can I tell you about their experience here? When they started, this happened, but then they met this person. And it turns out that their roommate guided them to this, and they wound up joining that. And then perhaps the most important thing they ever did, they, rather than expecting something to happen, they went out and did so. In other words, by telling the story of somebody who had perhaps a similar background or similar concerns, the listener can frame ways that that's similar and different to their own experience. And it's the beginning of a conversation. I'm hoping, Mike and Greg, that this is being helpful.
I think so.
I could go on, and so I don't want to just monopolize the conversation. So you'll have to rein me in. I'm a talkative person, so I could burn your time here if you're not careful.
No, we love it.
Yeah, that's
Again,
why
I
we
would
had
say
you on. We were hoping you wouldn't give short answers, so that would be bad for everyone.
Yeah, and let us know in
But
the
it's-
comments if there's follow-ups or details you want more for our guest.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mike, I want to just continue on one theme for a second.
Yeah.
And that was how important it is that whenever it is you're telling a story, it really can't be about you. If you had an experience, that's great, but the experience should reflect who you met or things that happened and what you walked away with. And there's this great quote from George Orwell where he said that an autobiography is only to be trusted if it reveals something disgraceful, because any life, when looked at from the inside, is merely a series of defeats. And that anybody who gives a good account of themselves is probably lying. And so the reason I so enjoy that quote is that first, I saw the validity of that. I go, yeah, exactly. I don't think of my life as one series of triumph after another. I think of myself, oh my God, this is a regret I have, and that's another regret, and I'm not doing enough here. And the beauty of acknowledging that we're all human beings and we're all fallible and we have made enormous mistakes is when you go out into the world and you present yourself as a great success story and you cloak yourself in the fancy things you have and the marvelous places you've been and so forth, what do you think is the result of this? Do you think people walk away admiring you? No, they walk away thinking either A, you're a tool, or B, you've just made them jealous and itching for the chance to bring you down a peg. So congratulations. These things don't produce the results you're after. If you're not in the world, in social media, trying to help people on the journey of life, trying to sympathize with their challenges, what the hell are you using this genre for? Self-aggrandizement, I find endlessly abrasive.
I would add though, maybe, and I think if you and I, Neal, took a DISC assessment on personality, our dots might match, because I hate myself and I'll never give up an opportunity to share that. And I when I talk to people, I know I talk too much, and I was like, oh my God, I'm talking too much. I need to let them talk. So I have a mindset of that. However, you have to consider your audience. And would you not agree that in some cases there is an audience for self-indulgence and someone beefing themselves up? That audience wants to relate to them and wants to feel that same way. So there could be situations where when you're telling a story, by making it grandiose, you're serving your audience better and not being self-deprecating. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, understand, Greg. I'm not really saying that one needs to go out into the world and be self-deprecating as the main message, because no doubt you're quite good at what you do. And I think that I think it's entirely fair to suggest to a client or a student, or if you are a doctor, a physician, and you're talking to somebody, it is entirely fair and safe to say, look, I want you to have confidence about this. I am very good at what I do. In fact, I would venture to say I am world class at what I do. This is why I think that's going to benefit you today. So I think there are reasons why you might want to give somebody a sense of confidence that what they're hearing is coming from an expert with some domain expertise that will make you feel better about what's being conducted. I did, in fact, say that almost that very thing to a client the other day. We were talking about ways that they might present their product. And I said, for all of the faults that I may have, at this one thing, you can be sure that I'm coming at this with some expertise. I have the 10,000 hours that they talk about. I've been in the business of branding and advertising and storytelling for 30 years. I've literally done tens of thousands of presentations, and they didn't all go well. And so you can rely that what I'm saying at least comes from a standpoint of experience. Now, I don't say that for the benefit of your people on this call in order to proclaim what a wonderful human being I am. What I am saying, though, is I've got enough experience in this space that it should give them confidence that they're not wasting their time being here. But on the other hand, what is the purpose of me putting a picture of a Porsche online and saying, so pleased to have been driving around the, okay, whatever, I got you. That doesn't enrich anybody's life.
I understand.
I could go on. I'm deliberately shutting myself down now, but so that I'm not too negative.
You're doing great, Neal. You're doing great. Questions are starting to roll in for the in the chat, and we do encourage that. We will get to them. Lexi will be reading them in just a little bit, so please feel free to leave questions or comments in the chat. Mike, I know you have one lined up to go next.
Sure. So with stories, there's all sorts of news out there that attention spans are shorter than ever. Do you find that's true? Do you need to keep your stories short, or does it help to build like a really rich tapestry to really show the environment, et cetera, to bring up the point across?
We call that conversational marketing, getting to the point. So we love talking about that.
Well, so I got a bunch of comments about that. The first one is everybody's favorite subject is themselves. So you can keep somebody's interest for a long time, as long as what you're talking about is either them and their concerns, or they can easily see themselves and their concerns in that. We seem to be living in a day and age of short attention spans, and I do believe that there is a certain biological component to that with dopamine and the way that we're overstimulated by things like, for example, TikTok. However, the same person that will grow impatient at a 60-second message will also sit down and binge a 13-hour TV series. They'll just do it in one throw, stopping only to go to the bathroom and occasionally, ingest food. So clearly they have time and attention to spare, provided that they are interested. And so you used the word tapestry a moment ago, and I think that's a really apt, because tapestries, as in the bio tapestry, they were stories told on a canvas, so to speak, that was almost chronological. You could step up to it, and even if you were illiterate, you could see perfectly well what had happened. And people love to hear about characters that they're interested in. So say, for example, if I were to return to the issue of like, you're talking perhaps to a student or parents of a student who are interested in attending a university, and you were to be able to describe a case of a student who bore great similarities to, let's say, for example, my son happens to be on the autism spectrum, and he went to St. Mary's College in California. And it was incredibly empathetic, kind, and observant of the person we were talking to say, there was a case of a young man, very much like your son, who had this experience. Well, I could have sat there all afternoon listening to every single word of the story of that experience, because it was, everybody's favorite subject is themselves. So they had the presence of mind not to talk about the brilliant bell tower and the meals and the extravagance of the dorms, but rather to frame it as in, this is an experience I think you could picture yourself in. And so that was one thing. It was about us. And the second thing was the character that they were telling the story about was empathetic and one who had achieved something. And so it was a little David Copperfield. I got interested and I wanted to find out what happened to him at the end. So I hope that helps some.
It does. And it's interesting. How much work have you done in higher education? I think you did the Optimist series for UCLA. Have you done others?
Yeah, so the Optimist series was really it was a series of films that UCLA had commissioned because it was their feeling that there was too much acrimony in society. And in spite of the fact that there were controversial issues, there was a way of having that dialogue about it that would, universities are supposed to be environments in which you can have uncomfortable conversations and you can probe ideas and you can have discourse civilly. Unfortunately, it seems as though there's a kind of this is happening less and less. There's so much sensitivity around controversial issues that universities, ironically, they're kind of difficult places to have those conversations. But that was the stimulus for it, was the Optimist series was about, why don't we just go into this thinking that maybe there's a solution we can all gravitate towards. When I was at Saatchi & Saatchi, the big advertising agency, when I was in New York, I became sort of worldwide head of creative education. And that was very much around helping people learn how to tell stories to clients and communicate the merits of creative work to them. And from that experience, I very much gained the sort of religion of, if you don't know who you're speaking with, then before you launch into some tale, it might be of some benefit for you to learn as much as you can. And in that sense, walking in with a curiosity about the people that you're speaking with is perhaps the first component of storytelling, being legitimately curious and interested in them as people and what their journey has been. And from that, the relevant story will emerge that might be of some interest to them. In other words, it's a little bit like choice of movies. If you have a 9-year-old girl, she's not going to be interested in a story necessarily about like Navy SEALs attacking Addis Ababa. So your audience, I think, is the first component of any story. Mike, I always find myself launching off on these answers and then forgetting what the question was. So you'll have to sort of police me on whether or not I'm providing you with the correct answer.
Well, there are no correct answers, right? That's part of the fun.
Well, useful,
Yes.
for your audience's sake, whether it's a value.
I think it is. Thank you.
Yeah. Speaking of which, speaking of our audience, craft the questions to fit your institution, because this presentation is only helpful if it's about your school, and it's hard to generalize, knowing that each institution that is present here today and the people and the folks and the audiences that they serve, they're also different, that we can't just give an answer that helps you automatically unless you make it specific. So that's just another prompt for questions, because I love it when people answer them. And if you have a story that worked at your school, something you tell students, throw that in the chat as well and share it with our community, because schools can help other schools. We'd like that. But let's dovetail on you talking about knowing your audience and talk about positivity, because sometimes, and especially in higher education, the news isn't always positive. Our folks, our audience might be stressed, and the stories might not all be positive, but you can put them in a positive light. So how do you, how do you keep your stories focused on the positive if, that can be difficult to do?
Well, in my case, I've kind of decided that that's my brand.
Yeah.
And the reason is the world has plenty of the alternative, and there's no reason to contribute to that. There are things that infuriate me just like anybody else, but the world doesn't need my anger. That's going to benefit no one. There are whole TV networks and radio stations dedicated to making people angry, and I want no part of it. You've probably heard the Cherokee proverb that there are two wolves fighting inside of all of us, and one is filled with anger and jealousy and greed and resentment and arrogance, and the other one is filled with joy and love and hope and humility and kindness. And the wolf that eventually is going to win is the one you feed. So I'm trying to make it my business to go into the world and give people some sense, and not unreasonably. Most people are really, truly kind of good and cool. And if you spend enough time with them, you'll wind up being friends. But the problem is that if you consume a steady diet of outrage, whether it's from news media or online, or even among friends that are kind of toxic because they just can't stop vibrating with anger, then that's going to have effect on you. It will feed the evil in you. And I've had the occasion to go into public spaces and watch somebody behave badly, typically to a server or somebody behind a counter. And the reason they behave badly with them is because the person behind the counter seemingly can't punch back. So they take out their anger and their rage on somebody. It's approximately the equivalent of kicking a dog. Well, congratulations. What was the purpose of that exactly? It's simple transference of frustration. But I have seen with my own eyes when a certain graciousness or sweetness about the people around them, instead of attacking them, they give them the opportunity to apologize or to be better. And I watched as they recovered themselves and apologized, and it left everybody feeling cleansed. Like we walked out of the space, we had preferred to have lived through that than to not have, because it demonstrated to all of us that people are capable of actually finding their better angels in spite of themselves. And so when you're asking about like, well, how do you keep it positive perhaps in the own storytelling, is that, look, if you believe we're not going to make it, that this is all a disaster, I feel so sorry for you. Look, come on, we're going to make it. We're going to make it. We'll fix it. We didn't survive this long, because we were all murderous beasts, despite what you've heard.
Right.
And therefore, if you just think rationally for a minute, look, we're going to make it. Okay. It doesn't mean we're not going to have to fix things and make some sacrifices. Definitely, we're all going to have to make some sacrifices. But you know what? In the same spirit that you can walk away cleansed from a scenario where you saw somebody who was very nasty and then recover themselves through the sweetness and the encouragement of the people around them. Despite our problems, when we solve those problems, we're going to feel better about ourselves than if the problem had never occurred. And we're going to have to do with a little humility, and we're going to have to try to suck up people's anger and not respond in kind. And what I would like to suggest is, that whenever you're telling stories out there in your own worlds, I don't think it benefits anybody to come at it from the standpoint of, that people are crappy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Love it.
that makes sense. That's good. Well, Lexi, I've seen a slew of questions come in. If you don't mind, I kind of want to answer them from the audience.
Yeah, I'll start. We've had a couple of people share their experiences as well. So Christopher mentions that in terms of positivity, I have found the students just want to know you care, even if that means pointing them towards another institution. Angelique also shares, I work for Rosemont College in admissions and was a transfer student in my undergrad. I shared my experience with first years and transfers about how I went to a big school and it didn't work out for me and went to the workforce while trying to finish school. My experiences were able to not only understand transfer student and understand the transfer credit process, but also share that sometimes a smaller school works best for one-to-one resources. I recently graduated from Rosemont, so I can also speak on my personal experience in the classroom as well.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best when you can, the point about the school not always being best for everyone, you can't make your institution fit a student, but you can make your school stand out to the students that would be the best fit there. And honesty and authenticity is so important in storytelling and every communication that I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and if I may editorialize for a second, I think where institutions get in trouble is when, after 2 years, 4 years, et cetera, they can't articulate what they provided that student, what the student experienced at that school, because then it becomes very hard to create that engagement long-term. Students don't donate, et cetera. That's where it starts to break down.
Neal, we'd love your thoughts on it.
That's a very interesting proposition, that when a student emerges from the institution, what is it that you have provided them? When you think about the way that higher education is perceived now, there is a portion of the audience that thinks of it as nothing more than a certification factory. That its whole point and only point is to emerge with a document that will provide them with a referral to employment at very high remuneration. Like, it's transactional. They pay an exorbitant amount of money to procure a certification that gives them employment that will make them a lot of money. That's one perception. Another perception is that and I don't know how broadly distributed this is, but that the purpose of a university or college education is to try to learn what a good life is. Like, I want to be exposed to the smartest people they can gather so that I can learn how to live in the world and what a good life is. And I find that there is a certain decline in the latter and an uptick in the former. And I find that kind of disappointing. If I had a university, the first guiding principle would be that students are not water bottles to be filled up, they're torches to be lit. And I think that there's not enough emphasis on that with the students themselves, that they get beaten up into thinking from a variety of sources that the only value of a human being in the world is their wealth. It equates money to value, and there's just so much more to life. And I wonder if, I forget the name of the commenter who had said that, look, in their own experience, a big university wasn't for them, that a small college was a better environment. And boy, I can vibe that completely.
That was Angelique.
Angelique's question, her comment is brilliant to me, because you're trying to, a college experience, a higher education experience, the word experience transcends the certification. And to me, there is a greater story to be told. The journey of a person's life, where they began, where they wound up, what they experienced in between before they depart. The university experience is a really significant and important part of that. And if it's only looked upon as a job advancement factory, I find that story kind of disappointing and soulless.
Yeah. Well,
do we want to go to another question from Lexi, Mike?
I think so.
Yeah, because we have them coming in and we want to make sure we get to those as they're there. So Lexi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question from Jessica. They ask, how do you create stories that resonate with large, diverse audiences like prospective students? Or should you create more stories that resonate with smaller groups and connect on a smaller scale?
That's an excellent question. I wish we had hours together. There are things that are universally human, and I think one need look no further than that some things, some stories, whether it's Harry Potter or some of the Marvel movies or whatever achieves really vast international acceptance, those are a demonstration that some human stories are simply universal. And the struggling of an underdog and the rewards that come with being helpful to other people. I think that these are, no matter how diverse your audience is, seriously, no matter how diverse, there are things that will appeal to them as human beings on a path. I do think that there's a certain beauty to having certain niches, but in my own experience, tethering people to that, even if you're talking to a very, very defined niche, your goal in a way is to restore the sense that they belong to the larger human family. Geez, I wish this is the kind of thing you have, this is a conversation you have over coffee or beer, so that you can really dig down into, well, what's the story you want to tell. But I do find that I get the most marvelous comments from people on YouTube and TikTok. Just thousands of brilliant notes from people talking about how much they appreciate something that I was talking about. And the crazy thing is that 90% of my stories come out of my own personal experience. I don't talk about events. Events are not evergreen. Things that happen to me just happen to me. And the beauty of it is that they were true stories, and those really did happen. So I feel some confidence in talking about how human beings are. And my guess is that if you were to stand up in front of that very large and very diverse group, that your personal experience as a human being is going to match sometimes the larger human picture. Even if you had a very different upbringing from somebody else, there are human ambitions that transcend gender and ethnicity, and whether you're able-bodied and where you are on the neuro spectrum. There's just some things that I think are universal, and I stick with those.
Neal,
sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
we both jumped in. We both got excited.
Yeah, when you're in the moments, do you know those stories are happening when you're living them in the moment, or is it more of a okay? So it's a situation like weeks later, you're like, oh wow.
Yeah. My father used to tell me, he says, life doesn't come with theme music. You don't know when you met your future spouse. Nobody, there was no swell of violins. There was no like wah, wah at the end of something where you embarrass yourself. And because life doesn't come with theme music, it is only in retrospect that you realize what it was that you took away. I do think that there's one thing that's happening to me lately, which is that as I have been getting these tales out into the world, I've started to observe the way that a detective might observe a crime scene. I'm sort of like, now I'm looking for clues. And but up to this point, Mike, no, this hadn't happened that way.
And I'm going to continue on this. And I hate to make it about marketing and that, but we talk a lot about conversational marketing. Jumping back to that, we have an e-course on it that's available. Anyone that wants information on that can certainly reach out. But you mentioned it earlier, and it's about making the stories about them, about, because people want to hear about themselves. So you have all these life experiences and you've done stuff, and you're fortunate enough to have that. And maybe at some point you realize, hey, that thing that happened 2 weeks ago, that'd be an interesting story. How do you make that story about someone else? So someone watching today that has all of these experiences in their life, but they want to connect with and reach students and make it about the student and not them. Do you have a trick to making stories that you tell about the audience, or do you just think the audience kind of fits into what you're talking about?
Well, there's going to be a big difference between having a one-on-one conversation or a one-on-five conversation,
of course,
and then just throwing something out into the world and waiting for it to descend on people. because I don't know anything about the people that I'm sharing something on social media, like on a TikTok or a YouTube or a LinkedIn, because I don't know who's going to receive it. I throw it out there in the hope that my human experience will conform to theirs and they'll find some meaning in that. However, in conversation, where data will reveal a great deal about the person you're talking to, it really does, it's incumbent on you to be curious about where they are and what their concerns are and what their ambitions are. There's this great quote from Charles Bukowski, and I'm really fond of it lately because the older I get, the more desperate I get about this quote. And it's that people will get so upset and agitated over tiny, trivial, meaningless things. But when it comes to something really significant, like completely wasting their lives, they don't seem to care. And why I consider that quote apt in this context is that you think to yourself, yeah, you really need to be concerned when you're speaking to 1 or 5 or 10. You really need to be concerned about what do they want really? What would give them some sense that this journey was worth it, that they were glad they were here? Because, it can't be about adding a dime a year to the dividend. Really? If that's it, okay, fine. You know where to go. You know what to do. If it's just about that, everybody's going to have a different ambition. But I will tell you that there seems to be a fairly universal ambition among most people, and that is they want to be useful. They just want to help. And I think they're frustrated a lot of times that they don't feel useful, that their job isn't giving them the sense that they're contributing anything except making some douche nozzle rich. And under those circumstances, it becomes really critical that an institution or a company or an individual try to express what their values are. Simon Sinek would say, start with why. I think it's incredibly useful that you get out there into the world and try to make it about, look, these are the beliefs I have. And in my case, personally, the belief I want to share over and over again is that actually most people are pretty cool. Don't be so upset. Don't tip into the rage machine. Don't let them get you so upset. They seem to think that their job is to hold your attention by getting you angry. Don't participate. That's kind of my mission. And so I think that, when you're talking to somebody out there in the world, the job is to sort of see if you can find what theirs is.
And as Zach says in the comments, Bukowski is a beacon of positivity, of course.
Not most of the time.
Well, there's positivity in being realistic as well.
But he's authentic.
Yeah,
he's
yes.
For real.
Authenticity that makes the world go round. Lexi, let's get to another question.
Kayla asks, how do we establish a trustworthy rapport relationship for sharing stories while also quickly contextualizing and differentiating our university?
Wow, that's a tough one. Lexi, can you read that again?
Yeah. How do we establish a trustworthy relationship for sharing stories while also quickly contextualizing and differentiating our university?
So I can talk a little at first and it'll be wrong. And then Mike and Neal can just give them a chance to mull that one over. Where you come from, when you're telling a story, you need to be a trusted source for that story. So that's tough. Like, if your school is a trusted institution, that's obviously helping if you're telling the story. I know I just said authenticity, so I'm not using that as a crutch, but if every communication you have with someone is authentic and truthful, if your school isn't the fit for a student and you're honest about that, boy, have you done your audience a service on that. So establishing a trustworthy rapport and a relationship with someone, I think, means always telling the truth, always making them aware of what you can do and what you can't do, and being very clear on that. So don't lie, I guess. That's how it gets started. So I don't know if that prompts, thoughts, or is just a 180 from what Mike or Neal are going to say?
Mike, you want to take a crack?
Yeah, I mean, you're our guest, so I want you to do the cleanup hitting. But yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, and again, like in the series, for people who've been on multiple episodes, to me, authenticity drives everything. So if you don't lead with authenticity, it just doesn't hit. So yeah, that would be my starting point as well. I would agree with Greg. And you know, it's not a fun thing to say in higher education. Every institution is unique, but institutions have a lot of similarities too. And I think we have to be honest about that. And if we have similar programs and similar faculty and similar experience, that's not necessarily bad. I think the key is finding, okay, well, what is our little niche that's slightly different that makes us unique?
Mike, I think we don't do a lot of sports, and obviously our audience is sports, but this is what I can think of. Say you have a basketball team at your school and you're reaching out to get people that might be interested in that, but your basketball team's not very good. Tell the stories like because every other school would be like, join our school because our basketball team is the 3-time Division III championship. What if you said our basketball team sucks, but this kid practiced hard every single day and he made the team, and here's his story and what difference that made in his life. We suck, but you can make us better. There's the story where you put someone in there, and obviously that's going to take a little bit of a color, but I think that will resonate with someone that might not be the best at basketball, but wants to come play at your school. So put academics in there, put a program in there, put something else in there, but an honest story that someone can see themselves in. Again, I'm ruining everything. Neal, why don't you fix it?
Great, yeah, ruining. So because the authenticity thing has been covered, I want to actually take a moment to talk about the difference between service and servile. I remember a waiter in Canada. He was this French Canadian, and he was so good a waiter. And what made him magical was I was on my honeymoon with my wife, and what made him magical was when he was not needed, there was no trace of him in the ether. But I dropped a spoon, and I'm not kidding, in less than 3 seconds, there was a new spoon in front of me. And I said to him, how did you do that? And, in his French accent, he says, I've been watching you. and so I go, you've been watching me, sort of accusatorily, like you've been spying on me. You've been watching me. And his response was, I love when couples are in love. I love to watch it. And I thought, what a magical thing to say, that he loves watching couples in love. So let's just unpack this for a minute. So he says, first of all, he's gone, right, when we don't need him. And then he magically appears. And what he's doing is he's giving us plenty of space. In other words, he's not a hovering presence like a cringing sort of servant might be. Right? Like, is there anything else I can get you? And it's not an arbitrary presence. It's presence when needed. So he's a professional, like he knows what he's doing. And then on top of it, this third thing where he levels on this business about, I love to watch couples in love. So what he's suggesting is, this isn't just, I'm not just doing this for money. There's a certain pleasure I take in doing this job. So let's feather that together with what we were saying a minute ago about, like, well, how do you make the case for your university, or, when you're trying to compete with others and telling the stories? I wonder if it's a good idea to be in competition with other schools at all. Why does it have to be a competition? Why can't it just be, this is a marvelous place that offers a certain kind of experience? And if that's for you, that's wonderful. And if it's not for you, I wouldn't dream of keeping you away from something that might be better. Let me instead just describe what we take such pleasure in and what such joy. And so that waiter just loves to watch people in love. Do you think I'm ever going back there? Well, if I ever get back to Calgary, I sure as hell am going back in the prayer that he will still be there. That's a professional who takes joy in what they do. And let's think about let me go back to those the competing wolves, right? You've got greed and jealousy and arrogance, or you've got joy and hope and humility and kindness. You will attract plenty if you just pull them towards you. And that's going to be confidence and joie de vivre and the loveliness of wanting to share.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Neal, I had a question. Some of our roles on campuses, some people will, investigate the student experience. They'll be in a situation where they're very much listening for a story. Is there a way to balance listening for an outcome versus just being centered and in the moment? Because we do have a goal to extrapolate information, but if we're just sitting there waiting for that, we're going to miss out on the gold sometimes.
Gee, Mike, that was such a lovely question. I'm not.
You've been
certain
Kaczynski. That's what we call it. He does it once an episode. He Kaczynski's our guest, and that's the question that that's Mike. Gotta love him.
I wonder if he could just help me out and hit me with that again.
So
my apologies.
How do you balance, sitting, listening to a story and listening for an outcome to say, aha, there's the goal, that's what we need, versus just saying, you know what, I'm going to kind of put down the notebook, stop taking notes, and just really be present? Because my thought is maybe if you're doing the latter, you might catch more than if you're doing the former.
Oh, okay. So yeah, wow. Yeah, that really was a nice little, that's a bigger conversation for sure. So let's go back a minute ago to the idea of generosity or joy or kindness and humility. Wow, the power of a good listener is really underestimated. When somebody legitimately thinks you're listening to them, that's so powerful. Because they're indicating they care. They care about what you're saying. And so, yeah, if they're not eager to jump in and complete your sentence, but rather embrace and absorb what you're saying, it's a very generous act, but it's also, I believe, better for you in the end. And let's think about what you're pointing out something I hadn't even thought about until your point, which was, okay, so even when you're not speaking, you're telling a story. Even when you're not the one doing the talking, you're communicating, aren't you? And when I had the opportunity to do a little business with Tim Tebow when I was working at TiVo. We did a campaign because of TiVo, right? And I had never met him, and his time was definitely pressured. Everybody wanted a piece of him, and we did a couple of commercials with him. He was a very lovely guy, really quite interesting. But his number one quality was that when you were speaking with him, he was looking deeply into your eyes and seemingly interested in everything you were saying. It was very impressive because everybody always wanted a piece of him. He was always being pulled this way and that. But when he was talking to you, you were right in front of him and he was listening. And it wasn't a fakey thing. It wasn't an affectation. It was the real guy. And I thought, oh, I'm going to walk away from this with a neat little tool, which is really sincerely care about what somebody's telling you, because you never know. It could be something profound. Mm-hmm. And you may need to let them finish their sentence. You know how some people are. It takes them a while to get to the punchline. Just let them get to the end, and you're going to get a gift out of that. So I'm quite grateful to you, Mike, I'm walking away with that one. That's a good one.
Good.
If that's being Kaczynski, then okay. Then that,
no, it's always
good on you.
My wife would say that's not, but
it's always a good thing.
By the way,
we were getting the.
Can I say one thing?
Oh, go ahead.
Odwin was, and the last thing, Odwin gave me one of these, and I thought, what a great guy. Thank you for that. A little reassurance goes a long way.
Thank you,
So-
Audwin. Thank you. That is the time that we have. So thank you so much for joining us, Neal. This is amazing. Love the conversation. I'm curious, for the folks still on, please check out Neal's videos. They're awesome. The stories he tell, just as an example, I had to use this quote. He's trying to describe a guy as big, and instead of just saying the guy was big, he says if he collided with the fire hydrant, he'd leave a dent. I just love wordplay. So I was instantly a fan. That's the first video of yours I watched. So check out Neal's stuff. I wonder if you like talking about storytelling even more than you like telling the actual stories, because this was certainly enjoyable as well. So thank you for joining us.
That's
Neal,
absolutely my pleasure.
if folks want to follow up with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can just reach me on my email, which is nealfoard@gmail.com.
Perfect.
I would encourage them actually to go to the YouTube channel, because the beauty of it is there's a kind of a library of stuff there. You'll feel like you know me, definitely.
Lexi
From watching.
already put the link in the chat. So go to the chat, click on Neal's link, and find that out. Mike,
Yeah.
real quick. Oh, I'm sorry, Neal, did you have a parting shot? Or
Just that I have an unusual, my name is spelled sort of unusually. You can see it sort of, on the thingamajig, Nealfoard. So sorry. Just
mouse over Neal's face, and you'll get the correct spelling of his name, Foard. Mike, what's coming up next week on FYI? I will be on vacation, so I won't be present for it. But
So our tour of California continues with Dr. Lisa Nunn from the University of San Diego. She's going to talk about creating authentic belonging. For the folks who are on one of the earlier episodes, we actually cited some of her work. So again, like really excited about all the guests we've had. Neal, thank you again for all the time and preparation and all the insights today. We all greatly appreciate it.
It's truly my pleasure. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Lexi. Even
Yes.
though we're not looking at you, I know you're there. Thank you very much. And thanks
She's
for everybody
the-
watching.
Yeah, she's the wheels behind the machine. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on FYI. Check your registration email for links to past episodes, and this one will be up shortly. Everyone, I hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.